Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Nickell, and welcome to the Happiness Hour. If you'd like to meet more inspiring photographers, sign up for a newsletter at lindanickell.com/happiness hour. Tonight's guest is Jon Fischer. Jon is a nature and landscape photographer based in North Texas with a portfolio that stretches from the rugged beauty of New Mexico to the far reaches of New Zealand and countless breathtaking places in between. For Jon, the natural world is more than a subject to photograph. It's a place of refuge, inspiration, and connection. His guiding philosophy, where nature and art meet, reflects his mission to seek out the world's most artistic forms and capture them with an artist's eye. Through his website, Jon shares not only his striking galleries, but also educational resources for photographers of all levels, from post-processing and fieldwork guides to a show and tell series that reveals the story and craft behind individual images. His goal is to inspire us to slow down, explore, and discover a deeper appreciation for the landscapes that surround us. If you're on Instagram, look for him at J Fischer Photography, and you can connect with him through his website, johnpfischer.com. In tonight's session, Beyond the Stars, an introduction to deep sky astrophotography, Jon will share what he's learned about photographing the distant nebulas and galaxies and shares some advice on how you can fuel your own curiosity and begin capturing fascinating deep sky photography. Jon Fischer, welcome back.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you very much, Linda. Thank you for the great introduction. And as you say that, a lot of my photography, I do, really blend the artistic and the landscape together. The topic tonight, deep sky astrophotography, definitely dives more into the technical side. But as promised, I'm going to try to, keep it at an introductory level and not go too deep into the weeds. But there is a lot of very technical knowledge that's required at times, but we'll just kind of grow and build into that through the presentation. It's kind of broken into three pieces, and there'll be a couple of great times to stop and ask questions before moving on to the next section. So, as we said, deep sky astrophotography. Most everybody here has probably heard of astrophotography in kind of a general term. Most people have heard of what's probably more considered of a wide field astrophotography, where you're capturing the entire Milky Way or a large portion of the sky along with the foreground. So in wide field astrophotography, we're typically using wide lenses, something like a 24 or 14 millimeter. Usually includes the foreground. And the night sky really is more of a supporting element than the actual subject of the photo. So this is kind of the three primary aspects of wide field astrophotography. This is what a lot of people start with. I did a lot of this even from my early days of shooting in general. But then I started really getting interested in some of the more interesting parts in the night sky and not just using the night sky as part of my frame. And that's where we start getting into wide field or deep sky astrophotography, not wide field. Deep sky astrophotography, in contrast to wide field, uses much longer focal lengths. Typically, I would consider anything starting probably even closer, like 50 millimeter and up, but definitely 100 millimeter kind of focal length. You're no longer going to have a photo that includes the foreground, and you're also going to have, something where you're just really taking a photo of what's in the night sky and not using the night sky as part of the greater photo. So that's really the difference between wide field and deep sky astrophotography. Some of the things you can shoot in the night sky are, of course, nebulas, which is kind of shown here in this first image, which is the Tulip Nebula. You can also see galaxies, which is one of my very early photos of a couple galaxies here on the right, and also things such as star clusters. I don't shoot a lot of star clusters because My telescope's really not geared for that, but it is another thing that's in the night sky that a lot of people do kind of target for deep sky astrophotography. Um, Another thing about deep sky photography is, in contrast to wide field, is a lot of times you need more than one photo. So you're stacking photos over a period of time, maybe an hour, 2 hours even, um, to get one image at the end of the night. Because some of these objects are so faint, you need a lot of data over multiple images to be able to get enough contrast to really pull this data and this information enough to get a photo out of it at the end. Um, so how do we do this? Well, the biggest um, challenge is that the Earth is spinning. A lot of us that have shot the night sky and done wide field astrophotography have probably heard of something called the 500 rule. It's generally a formula that lets you know how long of an exposure you can take before you start getting star trails, which is also why a lot of times wide field astrophotography uses very wide lenses because it's more forgiving. So on a 14 millimeter full frame camera, you can shoot up to about 30 seconds. 24, that cuts down to 20 seconds. On a 50 millimeter, at most 10 seconds. I think the couple times I've shot 50 millimeter on my full frame, I was probably getting more like 5 to 8 seconds before I started seeing trailing. So then when you start getting into the kind of focal length you need for deep sky, those time periods are even shorter. So you start looking at something like a 500 millimeter, you're a second or less before you start seeing star trails. Obviously, that's a real challenge when things that are in the night sky are very faint and they're very, hard to shoot in a single frame. So how do you compensate for that? Well, the primary way of doing that is with what's called a polar mount or a equatorial mount. Basically, this is a piece of an equipment that you attach your scope or your lens to in your camera that basically counters the Earth's rotation. Um, Basically what you're going to do is you basically set this up where the mount is aimed at Polaris, basically where everything's rotating. And once you start it, the camera moves along with the night sky. So your camera is basically locked in location against the night sky. This allows you to take much, much longer photos without those star trails. With my big mount, I can easily take photos of 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time, and every photo is pixel sharp. There's not a single bit of movement in the stars, allowing me to slowly gather up all that data over a much longer period of time than if the camera was stationary. Mounts come in a lot of different sizes. This photo here is my larger mount. There's also a lot of smaller mounts that are portable, a lot easier to travel with, set up somewhere that you go where so it's dark. Um, so that's a lot easier and a lot cheaper way to just kind of get into that. And where I started as well. I started with a much smaller mount, which is what I saw here was the Ioptron Skyguider Pro is the one I started with. Another version that's made by another company's Star Watcher, Sky Venture, the 2i, or they've also come out with a new version now called the GTI that adds a feature called Go To that we'll talk about a lot more here in a bit. But these are kind of the three models that are out there that kind of balance the introductory price, but also give you enough functionality and ability where you can mount something like a 200 millimeter or even up to, something like, 100 to 400, 100 to 500 kind of lens if you're careful and start taking photos of the night sky with you're already cameras you already have, lenses you already have, that kind of stuff. Um, so that kind of goes to this next frame, which is what lenses could you potentially use for getting into deep sky astrophotography? Some of these lenses, a lot of people, especially the birders in the group, might have. So the quality prime telephoto lenses from the big names are also all great options. Something like the 100 macro is excellent. 200 millimeter prime, 300 millimeter prime. All of these will be great lenses to really start getting into this hobby of doing deep sky astrophotography without having to go out and buy a telescope and a lot of additional gear other than the mount itself. Another lens that's very commonly recommended is a full manual lens, such as the Rokinon Samyang 135 f2. A lot of lenses from this manufacturer are very commonly highly regarded for astrophotography because they do have really good optics for things like stars. A lot of these lenses that aren't really geared for night sky, especially in the corners, you'll either get kind of coma or astigmatism, which is just basically, kind of light smearing, odd shaped stars, things that start looking like spaceships and not a round little dot of light. Um, even the best lenses from Canon sometimes will suffer from this because they're made for doing portraits and not keeping things perfectly, round and perfectly still in the corners of the lens. For some reason, these very manual lenses from Rokinon just seem to be, kind of tailored to that ability. A couple other lenses that are probably, you might have in your bag already is like this 7200 f4, the 2.8 is also good. Or the Canon 100 to 400 is one I used quite a bit when I started out. The photo here on the right is actually my newer, smaller mount, which is the Skywatcher GTI that I mentioned in the previous frame. And this was actually back during the solar eclipse a couple of years ago. So it's not just the night sky that you can shoot with these mounts. It'll let you, set this up, put it in a solar mode, and it'll actually track with the same speed as the sun. So you're not having to constantly move your lens during an eclipse or anything like that. So it's also useful for the few times that, in your lifetime you might have a solar eclipse you can get to. One extra use. Um, so really, the best advice that I can give if you're looking at getting into this is start small. And I'm talking in focal lengths and not in subjects. The biggest detriment that you can do is just really start on like the longest lens you have and not and get, discouraged with, little mistakes you'll set up and setting up and, you'll start getting star trails a little bit just because things aren't perfectly set up. And every, longer focal length you have, amplify those mistakes. Just like when you're shooting birds or shooting with a telephoto lens, a 100 millimeter lens is a lot more forgiving for a little bit of handshake than if you're out there with a 500 millimeter lens. Every little movement, every little bump of everything moves that frame quite a bit more. The same goes with this deep sky astrophotography. If you're learning and, setting things up with a 100 millimeter lens, 200 millimeter lens, and learning how to set things up and do it, over and over again, learn the process, you'll get photos that are awesome, but you also won't become discouraged because you tried setting up, a 500 millimeter lens. It's the heaviest thing that your mount can take, and it didn't work out really well. And you come home and you don't understand why, you don't exactly know what happened. You just know it didn't, you spent all night, didn't get any sleep, and you don't have anything to show for it. So the biggest advice that I learned when I was starting out and I really took it to heart was start with a smaller focal lengths, learn the system, learn what you're doing, and get something that you can show and have something you can show for, and you'll become, more interested in it, and then you can grow and learn. And then at that point, you've got the experience to start shooting with a 300, 400, 500 millimeter focal lengths. And if something does, not quite go right, you know enough to know and figure out what was it causing that problem. Um, so a couple of images that I took early on with my smaller mount. On the left here is, of course, the Milky Way core. I shot this with a 50 millimeter lens. I stacked multiple photos. I think this is about 25. Each image was 5.5 minutes long. So this is what shows what a star tracker can do is for 5.5 minutes, the camera was perfectly in line with each of these stars in the Milky Way. And I was able to do this multiple times, time after time. When I got home, I was able to stack all this together and get a really super detailed, really super clean image of the Milky Way that you could never get this much detail out of a single frame, trying not to have this, without a tracker. Um, and then pushing it into a longer focal length. This is the Lagoon and Trifid nebulas. I shot this on a 200 millimeter lens with my crop sensor 7D. Again, multiple photos stacked. And kind of one of those early good targets to learn on is a large bright nebula like this that you can easily find in the night sky and then zoom in on and take photos of. The interesting is you can actually see the Lagoon Nebula in the image on the left here. And I'll give anybody a second to see if they can find it before I point to it right there. So that right there where the arrow is pointing is the same point in the sky that is on the image on the right. So you kind of see how much closer in you get when you go from a 50 millimeter lens on a full frame to a 200 on a crop. And you can start getting these individual nebulas in the night sky. Another image that I took fairly early on. This was with my full frame Canon 6D, but also with my first telescope that I bought. But you can also get things like this with something in the 200 to 300 millimeter focal lengths and on a crop sensor kind of lens. There's also there's other large kind of features in the sky like this that are beginner friendly, that are easy to find, bright enough, and can make interesting compositions with lenses that you probably already have in your collection. You don't need a telescope to really get started on this. This is also early on where I really hadn't understood the processing side of things. It's a little contrasted, a little hard on the eyes at times, but kind of shows you just how many stars are up in the sky. And when you're trying to get things that are faint nebula, a lot of the stars jump out at you as well. So a couple more images that I took fairly early on. On the left side here, this is a fairly famous nebula called the Eagle Nebula. At the core of this nebula is the feature called the Pillars of Creation. One of the most famous images the Hubble telescope ever took was the Pillars of Creation. Obviously, much zoomed in and a lot more interesting and a lot more detailed than I was able to get early on in my photography. But it kind of shows that you can take these kinds of images with relatively normal gear from Earth and get things, first couple times out, you can get images that are something like this on the left. I think this might have been my first or second time at a real dark sky site. I was able to get this with, I think it was just probably my 7D, and I want to say this might have been one of my telephoto lenses. And then again on the right here side is one of my favorite photos I've taken of the night sky. Another detailed shot of the Milky Way core. It's, I believe, the same image I'm using as my background. Again, in this image on the right, you can actually see the Eagle Nebula that's kind of embedded in the Milky Way core. And if anybody can point that out, if it's big enough for you on your screens, and it is right there. So that again shows you just how, zoomed in on little bits and pieces of the Milky Way core you can start getting with longer telephoto lenses and what they look like when you start taking these long exposures, stacking them, and isolating these interesting subjects in the night sky. So pivoting just a little bit from some of the photos, what and when to take the dark deep sky astrophotography. Obviously, you need dark skies, so obviously at night. You also need very clear skies. Any bit of clouds coming by can really cause problems, but you also need very transparent skies. So anything like smoke, haze, things like that can also impact how well you can see these very faint objects and how much contrast and interesting or how much data you can get out of the images you're taking. So one of the primary the programs I use is Astropheric. That's an image here on the right that I've got. It's a phone app that shows what your upcoming forecast is, if it's going to be good enough to actually try to set up your rigs, go through the process of doing all the alignment, setting everything up to try to shoot overnight. On this particular night, it was fairly not overcast, but the transparency was really bad, which is that second bar here. And it was saying it was below average transparency. I believe this was a night we had a whole bunch of smoke moving in from some of the wildfires up near the Grand Canyon. So even though it looked like we didn't have any cloud cover overnight, I opted not to set up the telescope because it was just going to be too hazy and I wasn't going to be able to get a lot of good photos that night. And I didn't feel like trying to set everything up for what could be a pretty lackluster evening. Um, another program I use is Stellarium. That's a very good application both for your phone and on the PC or Mac that lets you really kind of see what's in the night sky that time of year, or kind of plan what you can shoot, find different interesting things that are in the night sky that time of year, or what's coming up in the future, a month down if you're planning a trip or something like that. Um, light pollution, obviously, light pollution, you know, makes a big impact on how well you can take night sky photography. Most of the time, you can't take good nighttime photography from downtown Dallas, um, middle of Times Square, not the most ideal locations. So using something like a night pollution map lets you find these dark sky sites and where you might be able to set up and get the best images. There's lots of different options out there for a light pollution map. I just Googling light pollution map will bring up several options. I think one of them is literally called light pollution map. Of course, photo pills. A lot of photographers already know photo pills. It's got parts in there for telling you what the moon phase is, which obviously also helps with how much light's going to be in the sky. The darker the sky, including the moon, the better your images are going to be. When the Milky Way is going to rise, when it might set. If you're going to try to take something like the Eagle Nebula or the Lagoon Nebula that's in the Milky Way, if it's part of the time of the year, well, the Milky Way core isn't visible. You might get somewhere, try to set up, and that's not in the sky. So photo pills would be useful for kind of figuring out what's up and available along with Stellarium. Um, another app that helps setting up your telescope and setting up your mount would be phone apps such as Polar Finder and SynScan Init. These are useful for knowing where Polaris exactly is and how to basically set up your mount. Um, So again, going back to what's in the night sky, kind of figuring out what you want to photograph. Over the many years, there's been multiple catalogs that have been put together, kind of catalog all these interesting things in the night sky. And the first ones were kind of put together way back even in the 1700s, not the 1970s, 1700s. So when you start getting into looking at some of these night sky elements, a lot of them will be named basically on these by these catalogs. The most common, most famous one is the Messier catalog, which is 110 objects. They'll be named like M101, M10, M something. And there's several other catalogs that have come out since then as telescopes and imaging have gotten a lot better. They've found a lot more of these deep sky subjects and targets, and these other newer catalogs have added to those catalogs, and you can find all these different things in the night sky by their names in these different catalogs. Um, so real quick, we're going to switch out of here and go to Stellarium that I mentioned a moment ago, and kind of show you what's in the night sky right now this time of year. So we're kind of getting end of summer, so the Milky Way. Actually, I'm back for this is actually back. Let me go back to where it's today. So this is today. Um, so in Stellarium, I know this is kind of small. Linda warned me that the text was really small. But if you zoom in on here and you just kind of move around, here's the Eagle Nebula that we were talking about earlier. So you click in here, you can say, okay, here's the Eagle Nebula. You have its names. It's the M16 out of the Messier catalog. NGC, it's the 6611. Yeah, the Eagle Nebula is in every catalog. But then you can kind of see where in the night sky it is when you zoom out. And another good feature of this is if you've got a telescope or a lens, you can come up here and actually preview the framing of this. So on this one, this is using my Canon 5D, so it's my full frame camera, along with my telescope. So if I wanted to set up this exact framing with that camera and that telescope, this is the field of view that I would have. If I wanted to change, say I wanted to use maybe my 7D, your frame would zoom in like this. And let's see, I think I've got, yeah, those are the only ones that sensors I got. So it kind of shows you based on what lenses you might have or what telescopes you've got, what your framing can be. If you want to frame up differently, you can rotate and, kind of see what framing you want to capture before you get out there in the field and have kind of a game plan. Um, Sometimes you've got a larger, uh, wide field. Let's see if I have anything here. So you're 135, say. You can kind of see, okay, I could even get, multiple of these nebulas together in one frame and kind of do a collage of different interesting things in the sky, showing a whole segment of what the night sky is that time of year. Um, so that's Solarium. I use this quite a bit for kind of pre-planning and seeing what I might be able to shoot that time of year. If I've got a couple days, I can set up the telescope. And back to this. So real quick, we'll go through polar alignment kind of quickly. Um, this is the first step of setting up, either a mount, is the polar alignment step. First really important step is make sure it's as level as possible. This really is taking a few moments to make the rest of the steps a lot easier. The more level it is, each of the following steps kind of just, they fall into place a lot easier because, you've got that base perfectly level. The next thing is to put the base of the mount on the tripod and start getting it basically pointed north, aimed towards Polaris. All these mounts will have basically three screws. Two of them will push left and right, and another knob will usually elevate it up and down. To basically, you want to get that thing aimed at um, Polaris. All these mounts have a spotting scope built into them where you look through, get Polaris into the field of view, and there's even apps that will show you exactly where to put Polaris that time of year, that time of day, because Polaris isn't exactly north. It does move just a little bit. So when you're looking through the spotting scope for the mount against the app, it'll say, okay, you want to put Polaris in this example a little bit past noon kind of position. And this basically just gets you more and more accurate as far as your alignment. And the more accurate you get the alignment, the longer exposure you can take before you start getting star trails. So that's really just how accurate you are, how long you're able to take photos before you get the trails with your photos. So focusing in the dark, anybody who's tried to take any sort of astrophotography knows trying to focus your camera in near pitch black is a challenge. For wide field, a lot of times what people will do is just find the brightest star or even the moon and on live views slowly focus in and out until you get things as small as possible. With deep sky, sometimes there's so few stars, it's kind of hard to get one that's really accurate that you can see that well. Some people use a magnifying loop to enlarge the back of their screen so you can see a little better. What I like using is a Batinoff mask. This is a special piece of equipment that basically has a disc with some cutouts that fits over the front of your lens. And when it's on there, it makes these refraction um, patterns like this photo on the right. So basically, you get this X pattern with a line in the middle. And when that line is square in the middle of the X pattern, you're in focus. So if you're out of focus in one direction, the line will move up or down. And as you focus, you'll see that move until it's right there in the center. And then you're as spot on focus as you can be. It saves a lot of time. I use one even now that I've got autofocus, which is the fourth point here. Some telescopes and setups, you can actually have autofocus where it'll do it itself. It's a slow process. So using the Batinoff mask usually helps at least get you started where you're not hunting for that focus for hours on end, because sometimes that autofocus can be pretty slow. Exposure settings for deep sky, honestly, everything's gonna be different. So there's not really one telltale way to start. I usually start with 1 or 2 minute exposures, kind of figuring out what the limits of the setup's going to be for the night. If I did a good job of polar alignment, I can obviously sometimes get 3, 4 minute long exposures, but starting with 1 or 2 minute exposure and checking for star movement is usually your best bet. Also, the nebulas vary greatly in brightness. So what might work really well for the Lagoon Nebula may not work for something a lot fainter, such as the Flaming Star or some of the other ones there at the night sky. So really is a kind of a figure it out on the fly, try what's going along. As you get more experience, you'll know what's going to work better for you. And also the last point here, as long as the image isn't pure black, especially when you got a lot of photos, you'll be able to pull that data and stretch it using curves and get a lot more data out of it than you probably think when you're in the field and you say, oh, I didn't get a lot of information out of that photo because it's all dark. So I think I'm taking more time than I thought, but do we have any questions so far, Linda?
No, just some really nice comments about
Okay.
nebulas.
Yeah.
Just look really quick, unless I missed something. No, but there is a request
Okay.
that you travel to Reading, Pennsylvania to help Valerie Hoffman set up her move, shoot, move trackers.
The
So
move,
other
the
than
move shoot move is one of those. It's a newer one. It's probably one of the smallest ones out there. I have heard of it. I believe that one actually uses a like a laser guided. You have like the laser pointer that you point at Polaris, and you don't really even have the scope. It might have add-on scope for doing the polar alignment. It's an interesting one. I've seen good things about it, but it is a very small one, and there's
okay.
some quirks about it because of that.
Okay.
Okay,
You wait a minute, you pause. So there, Andy slipped in a question.
okay.
So I don't believe Andy has a tripod. So he wants to know what is that gigantic sturdy tripod you're referring?
The big white and silver one that's in the photos is actually part of my larger mount. It came as part of that mount. The base of that tripod is actually has a post that is specifically for the big head part of the mount that lets it push it left and right. So that big giant piece is part of the mount. For my smaller tracker that I had, the Ioptron, I like the Silk 700DX, which is a relatively inexpensive but really sturdy tripod. A lot of storm chasers I know swear by them because they take a beating and they keep on going. So for I think they're now maybe a little over $100 with the way things are going. But I think when I bought mine was right around $100. I've thrown in the back of the truck, like with my camp gear. I just don't even have it in the back with my nice tripods, and it keeps on going. So if you're looking for something sturdy that you can beat on, the Silk 700DX is probably a good place to start.
Um, Part B of Annie's question is, do you use Sequator to stack your images?
I don't use Sequator. I use Deep Sky Stacker, which I'll get into just a little bit towards the end. There's a lot of different good stacking software out there. It kind of depends on if you're on Mac or PC, which ones are available.
Okay.
Um,
Did I cut you off? Sorry.
no, you're good.
Okay. I think you said Silk 700DX. Did you mean
Yeah.
Slick?
Yes, I did. I always get those two backwards.
I know. Well, I was with you, but somebody,
Yeah.
his Jan's like, no, I think she meant Slick.
Yeah. Once
So
I get something backwards in my head, it takes a bowling ball against the noggin to get it out.
that's all right.
All right.
Um, well, I'll just throw this out here while I'm looking at it. Forget Reading, Pennsylvania. I'm being told send him to New Jersey because there's dark skies over the pines. So there you go.
I I'd be surprised if anywhere on the East Coast has that dark of skies, but
Oh, you're being a little judgmental because you've had Big Ben.
yes,
Okay,
yes I do.
we win,
Yeah,
New Jersey. But I can tell you that both Christy and Valerie have come away with
yeah,
some Milky Way shots out there.
very
All
cool.
right,
All right.
continue.
Thanks. So that was kind of the how to get into it where I started. As I tend to when it comes to new interesting hobbies and parts of photography, I very quickly ramped up a little bit and decided I wanted to get myself a bigger telescope and a bigger mount, especially because I spent a very cold night trying to find Andromeda with that little mount and that Tamron 150 to 600. And let me tell you, that was not a lot of fun. So I decided to take a deeper dive into deep sky astrophotography along with my wallet and buy my telescope and my larger mount. um, so the biggest features of a bigger equatorial mount is the heavier weight capacity, more accurate tracking, and the biggest thing is go to. Basically, it's computer control where you say, I want you to point at the Eagle Nebula, and it knows where the Eagle Nebula is because it knows where it is on Earth, what day it is, what the time is, and where that will be in the sky. So it'll pivot around and aim straight at the Eagle Nebula or anything else you ask it for, and it takes all of that guesswork and tedious hunting in the middle of the night on something that's very faint, and you sit there and wait for a minute to take a photo. You can kind of see the corner of something, so you move it a little bit, and you move it too far, and now it's on the other edge of the frame. Go-to really eliminates all of that guesswork, and makes it a lot more pleasurable to find things that are hard to see in the night sky. Um, Also, telescopes offer the better optics, the coma and astigmatisms that we're talking about with a lot of the commercial lenses that are out there. Telescopes obviously are designed for taking photos of the night sky and seeing the night sky, so they're designed and corrected for a lot of these optical problems, so you get the best quality images you possibly can. Um, for telescopes when you're starting out. Another thing we were talking about earlier was starting small. It can be really tempting to get something that's like a 1300 millimeter lens, or over a 2000 millimeter. It goes back to you're going to potentially get frustrated and disheartened when you're trying to set up your telescope for the first time. You have these small setup errors that are amplified. So again, I started with a smaller telescope. Mine's a 550 millimeter focal length, relatively fast optics, and with a couple different types of cameras on the back, I can take a lot of different images. And I haven't felt the need to go larger yet, and I'm still learning. But this is not, I haven't run out of things in the night sky to shoot with just this one telescope that's a fixed 550. Um, Also up there, there's ability to connect to the PC or one of these mini Wi-Fi controllers that allows you to automate a lot of the things that goes on over the course of the night with your telescope. You can do things like doing the go-to. You can actually have the PC tell the mount to salute to a certain target instead of do it through the hand controller. You can automate a lot of the things that you need to do over the course of the night. Um, Also, the thing you start getting into is cooled monochrome cameras or even colored cameras that are cooled. They're specifically designed for astrophotography. The great thing about cooled cameras is you reduce the thermal noise of the cameras, so you get a lot more cleaner images, and also it's very consistently noisy. So you can take correctional calibration frames at a certain temperature, and you use them night after night after night instead of having to take ones for when it was 80 degrees outside versus 90 degrees versus 50 degrees outside, which you would have to do with like a normal DSLR. um, so this is my larger mount. Kind of the photo on the left shows my smaller mount and how much bigger the step up that I made was. um, and then the photo on the right there shows my telescope on the mount the very first day that I bought it. I think I had just pulled it out of the packaging and immediately set it up, pulled everything apart, took all the plastic off, and threw my camera on there just so I could see it all put together, and realized I had failed to put the counterweights on the bottom. Um, so this is my current setup. I'll kind of walk through it kind of quickly. So the main mount is the Skywatcher EQ6 Pro. The telescope is the Esprit 100 f5.5 refracting telescope. And on top of there, you've probably seen in a couple of photos, there's a little telescope. Its sole purpose is to tell the mount when it's not doing its job properly. This is how I'm able to take 5, 6, 7, 8, 10-minute long exposures and the stars to be perfectly still, even if the mount isn't doing its job absolutely perfectly. That scope on the top locks on one star, and when it starts to detect that that star is moving, it tells the mount to counter the error. So it just basically continually tells it to push it in the right direction, whatever direction it needs to go, to keep that star locked in position. So that's using that third point, the Skywatcher Evo guide, along with the second camera there, which is a mini CMOS. My primary imaging camera right now is ASI 1600 monochrome. It's a cool camera, but it only takes monochrome photos. So the thing there is that requires you then to have filters to basically then filter through either the green light, blue light, or the red light for RGB, or what you can use is narrowband filters, which basically only let through certain bandwidths of light that are targeted to certain types of gases that are in nebula that you're then also filtering out all the additional background noise, including light pollution, which is why I'm able to shoot this from my backyard. I could probably even shoot from downtown Dallas and get great images for at least some of the filters in the narrow band because it filters out all of the light pollution, light band, and it's only letting through the specific amount of light, type of light that the nebulas are giving off, which is very much in the infrared band of light. So all of your street lights, everything else, the filter basically just blocks it. And a couple other things I'm using now to help automate the autofocuser. The power box is basically just helps distribute power to all the various things. Um, and then I've got a laptop now that controls all of it together. Um, we can kind of skip through this real quick. What I'm using right now is a refracting telescope. Basically, it's a big lens. You'll also encounter reflecting telescopes, which primarily use mirrors to bounce the light and to collect it onto a single point. A lot of these have much larger focal lengths, are the ones that kind of I would shy away from for starting, and that's why I don't have one yet, is because I'm still learning on the smaller telescope, and it's generally you get better images easier on a refracting telescope than the mirrored ones because there's a lot more maintenance you also have to do on the mirrored type telescopes. Um, Again, a little bit more about the monochrome and astrophotography dedicated cameras. Obviously, you don't see an LCD screen. There's no shutter release. They're all digitally controlled either through a laptop or other dedicated application or hardware that controls, the image taking and the image capturing. So all it is the image sensor and the cooler to keep the back of that sensor cool. And then in front of there, you can see the filter wheel that houses all the different filters that I've got for taking the different color bands I need to put an image together. Um, Quick image here of the auto guiding system. Basically, it kind of looks like I'm not sure, either the stock market or some sort of war game targeting, but this is actually the program I use for, telling this mount when it's not doing its job. Most of the time, I don't even look at this. Only when things are going awry do I have to dig in this and I'm start pulling my hair out. So we'll kind of skip through this kind of quickly. Um, so yeah, automation. Right now I'm using Sequence Generator Pro. There's several other ones such as Astrophotography tool that basically allow you to control all the parts of the telescope together so that you can basically go inside, have a drink, go to bed, and let the camera and the telescope do its work overnight unattended. So it does the setting, the camera settings. It moves the telescope into position, verifies it's actually pointing at what it thinks it's pointing at with a system called plate solving. That's kind of a more advanced topic I won't dive into, but basically it looks at the image that's taken and verifies you're actually looking at the stars that it thinks it should be looking at for the point in the sky that it is supposed to be pointed at. It will correct accordingly. It will do focusing if you have an autofocuser, setting any filters if you've got a filter wheel with a monochrome camera. And it'll actually take all the sequences of images and save them to the computer completely unaided. Um, and it does some of the other things that I point out here, monitoring and correcting for the tracking errors using the little scope on top. And if you want to switch what you're taking photos of in the middle of the night, say something gets too low on the horizon and you want to change some other thing in the sky, So you can take, more photos through the course of the night. It'll actually change positions based on, okay, say, the Eagle Nebula is setting at 4 p.m. or 4 a.m., but the sunrise isn't for another 2 hours. You can say, oh, go find this other nebula in the sky that's higher in the sky, and it'll align to that and start taking photos of that. Um, it'll actually also help me, prevent dew and condensation using some heaters that I've got set up. And in the morning, basically set it back to the position where it started so it doesn't run into itself on the tripod. Um, think we're running a little low on time, so I'll scoot through this real quick. This is the program I use for doing all of this. There's a lot here, but basically it's just a Windows application that someone's built that allows you to automate all the different steps of what the camera and the telescope needs to do overnight to capture all this data. Um, Through here.
There's a
Um,
good question here because
yes,
now I'm curious. What kind of storage on your SD or compact
I
flash? What crazy um, limit did
I
you even start with?
all the photos are stored on the laptop. So I've got
Okay.
a 128 gig SSD in the laptop that I clear off over every night. And I've got,
Okay.
I think it's a 512 SSD that like I'm out traveling, I'm doing a lot of imaging. Every night I'll
Right.
dump it onto the 512 SD card. And then the next night stuff just goes on the SSD just because it saves faster.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, do you take this setup with you on all your trips or
No,
when?
I'll take the small one if it's like if the moonlight's gonna be limited.
Okay.
I do go out to either Fort Griffin State Historic Site or up to a dark sky site that I have access to through the Texas Astronomy Society up in Atoka, Oklahoma. They've got AC power both of those locations. I can plug all this stuff into and shoot overnight in these darker locations. But with the narrowband filter, the one of them, especially the hydrogen alpha filter, I can take images in my backyard and it filters out all of that light pollution that we have now here in this Dallas area. So I can image at least that type of image, and then when I'm in a dark sky site, I can focus on the other bands and other filters and get that data.
Okay.
Um,
I'm gonna let you finish and then I'm gonna ask you some fun questions.
Okay. I'm gonna skip through a little bit just so I can get to a couple of the images I've taken. I've got a couple other additional resources here if you're interested in learning a lot more than I know, and I'm probably presented a lot better than I've done tonight. Astrobot Backyard, it'd probably be my first stop. He's got both a website with a lot of videos. It's also on YouTube. He was one of the first people I found when I started diving into this, and I learned quite a bit there. Cloudy Night's website and forum. Honestly, one of probably the best forums out there for deep sky astrophotography. If somebody's had a problem or a question, it's probably already been asked there. Astrobin is a site specifically for astrophotography images to kind of see what people are capable of doing. All these people upload what type of images they've taken, how many, how long. So they've got all the information. All the people are like, what were your exposure settings for this? Astrobin has all that to an amazing degree when it comes to all these stacked images. I mentioned this a moment ago, Texas Astronomy Society. They're a great resource here in the North Texas area for deep sky astrophotography. And also on my website, I've got a couple of articles that kind of go through a lot of what I've been talking about tonight about how I dove into deep sky astrophotography and kind of the process I went through from the smaller mount to the larger mount. Um, so here's the last little bit of the presentation. A couple of the images I've been able to take with my larger setup. Um, this is probably one of my favorites. It's the Crescent Nebula. So this is using all the narrowband images. Um, so there was one image shot with the hydrogen alpha, one set of images taken with the oxygen filter, and one set of images taken with the sulfur filter. And you combine those three together in the RGB channels in Photoshop, and this is the type of image you'll get out of it. So it's not the true color, so it's what's called a false color, because you're basically associating each of the filters into a channel of color. And that's the same thing that the Hubble Space Telescope and a lot of the space telescopes use, because it really helps only differentiate the different types of gases that are in the nebula, but really accentuate the structure of the nebula against some of the background noise kind of light that comes through. So this is one of my favorites. Um, this is one of my newer shots of the Eagle Nebula. You can kind of compare that to the one that I'd taken, early on. This is over 5 hours of photos taken together and stacked together. And this is just the hydrogen alpha data. I still need to get out to a dark sky site and get the sulfur and oxygen data so that I can put it together and make a color image out of it. A couple other color images. The one on the left here is what's called an SHO. So basically, the sulfur image was applied to the red channel, and the hydrogen alpha to the RG, so it would be green, and the oxygen to blue. This is also known as the Hubble palette because that's what the Hubble Space Telescope's images typically were used as and processed as. And on the right, another one of my easier favorite subjects to shoot is the Pelican Nebula. You can probably see the pelican in that. Was there a question, Linda?
Yeah, I should have made you define what is a nebula from the very beginning.
A nebula is basically a big cloud of gas in space. So
Okay.
basically, these are big clouds of largely hydrogen gas, but also, as I've been saying, oxygen and sulfur. Basically, these are types of gases that emit light when they're hot. So these are called emission nebulas. I think I had a note somewhere to mention that I breezed past and for time. So these are all basically nebulas, big clouds of gas that are emitting light. These nebulas are also typically places where new stars form. So a lot of these, are star-forming nebulas. The Pillars of Creation, which is in the heart of the Eagle Nebula, it's got that name because we've actually witnessed new stars being born over the years that the Eagle Nebula have been tracked and photographed.
Amazing.
Um, Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's amazing.
Okay. Um, My telescope honestly isn't the best when it comes to galaxies just because the focal length isn't that long, and a lot of the galaxies in the sky are very, very small, with the exception of Andromeda, which is huge in relation. But this is one that I was able to shoot a couple of years ago called the Pinwheel Galaxy. Um, the actual physical size of the galaxy is very, very large, but it's still quite small in the night sky compared to a lot of the nebula that I'm able to shoot. This is actually zoomed in and cropped in quite a bit compared to some other images of the nebulas that I've taken. Um, this is a newer image of part of the Veil Nebula that I was showing earlier that I had taken. Um, Showing a lot more detail and a lot cleaner stars as I learned a little bit more about editing. This is another false image taken with the narrowband filters that I've got, largely taken from my home here during COVID when we were all locked in. Um, so this is another example of the one that I showed earlier of the Tulip Nebula. So I believe this was probably about 5 hours of the hydrogen alpha, and then I went to a dark sky site and got about 2 hours of the oxygen filter. And I was able to combine it together and get a color image. Where both in this example, I put the oxygen image both on the blue and green channels. So only two sets of data there. You can still get somewhat of a color image, though there isn't near as much inflection and different colors in it when you do it that way. Um, the last couple of years, just all my black and whites. So I've yet to get out to dark sky sites and get the rest of the data needed for Elephant Trunk Nebula on the left. And then one of my favorites that I've been trying to get more data on is the Wizard Nebula. The Wizard Nebula is 72,000, or not 72,000, 7,200 light years from Earth. So the light that's hitting my camera here left these stars in this nebula over 7,000 years ago. some of the, kind of get a concept of how far some of these things are. And these are all things that are in our galaxy. Um, this is the Flaming Star Nebula. This is one of my newer projects I'm just starting to work on. This was only about 3 hours of data I was able to shoot earlier this spring. I'm hoping to get some more data on this later this winter when it comes back up in the sky. I've seen some color images of this, and it's absolutely gorgeous when you get all the information you need to get a full color image of it. And then my last image here is my monochrome of the Orion Nebula. This is probably the one I've put the most work into to get all of the detail because the core of this nebula is so much brighter than the outside edges. You have to do basically HDR work and stacking of different exposures to get all the detail in the core of it and on the outside edges. And that kind of wraps things up.
Not quite yet.
Okay, more photos. I'm losing my voice.
That's okay. No, to have some water.
Yep.
Um, okay, so jokingly, Andy wanted to know how much does this thing weigh? Your gear.
The the base of this mount is quite heavy. The two counterweights are 7 pounds apiece, and the base of the mount, I believe, is like 28 pounds. There are newer ones out there today, larger ones that reduce that weight quite a bit. My particular mount is probably like the last of the older generation of this technology. There's newer motors and better motors in some of these newer mounts that cut the weight of the actual base probably at least by half for not much more money. Um, so mine definitely is very large. I mean, the case I've got for it is about the size of like a large suitcase. I'm pretty sure I would get an oversized and overweight charge if I tried shipping it anywhere on the airlines. So it is definitely cumbersome and heavy to move around. My smaller mount is the box I keep that in is maybe a quarter the size and it's got like 1 6 pound counterweight. So it's much, much lighter and smaller.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you to take your screen down
All right.
because, all right. What is the Bordeaux class where you live?
I believe right now I'm on the edge of a 7 or maybe even an 8 at this point. I believe when we moved here, it was like a 6.
Yeah.
Um, but
So
I know
to
with
give,
my, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, to give Andy an idea, he's just on the north side of Dallas Fort Worth. So he's
Yeah.
got a lot of light pollution up where
Yeah,
he
the
is.
hydrogen alpha filter. I've seen people literally image from New York City, like a rooftop in New York City, and you get hydrogen alpha from the middle of New York City, because you're taking such a very narrow strip of the full wavelength of light, and it is because it's a part of that wavelength that is so far away from everything that we use for visible light. Um, that it's all filtered out and then you can just a couple times a year go out into northern New York or somewhere that's got some dark sky and get all the other images that you need for the other filters to combine it to get the color images.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to protect you by blocking Margaret Fisher from this recording. I want you to look into the camera and admit to me, how much does that go-to equipment run?
The mount I got parked as my 15-year anniversary work bonus. The telescope, it was probably on par, which I bought myself, on par with a very good Canon L super zoom telephoto. So probably I think the Sprint 100 is right now about $3,500.
Okay. Oh,
So it's
Jan, not a problem. Jan
now
was
I will
just,
say the narrowband filters are pricey for what they are. It's a
yeah,
little disc about the size of a nickel, maybe a quarter, and I think my hydrogen alpha filter was $500. So that's
right.
where it's just like, oh my goodness, I got a whole camera set up for 5, and this little piece of glass. But you look at it, and it literally looks like a mirror. It looks like something you get from NASA because it pretty much is.
Jon Fischer, I told you to keep it simple, and my head exploded with all your little bullet points. But it was fascinating. And that's one of the reasons I wanted you to come in here and do this presentation for me because I see you post these, and I often see you out doing your little selfies with your equipment. And I'm thinking, that boy has way too much time on his hands because this stuff is very complicated for me to
It
figure out.
is very complicated. One of the things I really wanted to say was I built up to this relatively slowly and added one complexity after another. And then I got to a point where it was getting too complex for me to keep tabs on, which is when I added the laptop and all the automation. And once you get it set up, I can go to bed. And when I get up in the morning, it's parked and done.
You've basically said everything I need to know. If it's complicated for Jon Fischer, Linda Nickell has no business doing
It
this.
it did keep me sane during lockdown, especially the beginning of lockdown, where I
But
could
it
set this up, and which is also why a lot of these images are currently still only in hydrogen alpha narrowband because all I have is the time I got in my backyard shooting during COVID.
all right. Oh, Karen has snuck in a question. Let's
Yes,
see. Do it real quick. How long? Okay, Karen wants to know how long have you been shooting deep sky photography?
I got the telescope summer of 2019, and I had the smaller mount for maybe. I don't even think it was a year before that. I dove into the bigger mount pretty quickly, especially after that night trying to find Andromeda with a very long lens on a ball head tripod with a tripod. That was a challenge. And after that, I learned about Go-To, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a thing I need.
Okay. So maybe it is worth the writing the check just to get it.
The Skywatcher GTI is a really good middle ground between the giant one and the really basic ones. It's only a couple $100 more than the small ones. It's still super portable. It runs on batteries. So if you want to do something with, a 300 millimeter lens that's not the brightest thing in the sky, I would say it's probably a good one to go ahead and invest in and start there than trying to bang your head against trying to find these things using a ball head on top of the smaller mounts.
Well, John, how about this? The next presentation you do, let's dumb it down even more. We're not doing this again. This turned my head. It really did. But
I went past all the editing stuff because the editing gets
I
really
know.
complex. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I appreciate that. No, I have been wanting to add this to the Happiness Hour catalog or the library, and it's in there. So for that person that has
yeah,
been curious and wants to kind of tiptoe into this, this is a great introduction for them.
I hope
Way over
so.
my head. You talked me completely out of it, and good for you.
Well, I will say there is
So.
now some smart telescopes that simplify this quite a bit. I kind of like completely bypass that whole slide. They're all in one kind of solutions that use basically a lot shorter exposures that are stacked live. So they're short, but a lot of them that actually work pretty well. So if you just want to really dip your toe in, some of these smart telescopes might be the way to go these days.
Yeah. Nope, nope, not convinced. I'm done. We're done. All right, John, thank you for doing this for me and for this group.
You're welcome.
I think you're going to enjoy the comments in here. I feel like, when I ask people to do a sometimes, I shouldn't say sometimes, almost always when I invite someone to speak, they're like, what do you want me to talk about? And I always say, the topic is up to you. And because I
You didn't
feel
give
like
me a choice.
I did not give you a choice, and
No.
that
Which
you
I
have,
was fine with.
Yeah, you're fine with because you're nerdy enough, and this
Yeah.
finally
The,
Linda wants to listen to my deep sky stuff. Like, I
the
just want
challenge really
Lori,
was trying to explain it in a way that didn't explode your head immediately, which I apparently failed at.
it's too late. Yeah. So if you of us are going to sit next to each other, Jan, you're welcome to come sit next to me. And Valerie, I knew Valerie would be okay with it.
Yeah.
So, all right, next week, fine art photographer Lori Novak will be here with her presentation, Seeing Art in Architecture. Until next time, go out and create something beautiful. And I hope that we see you again soon.